But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works. The Fed, inflation, of course. Joining us live now, the one and only Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, which includes Forbes magazine, co-author of Inflation, Why It Is Bad, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Frank.
Have you with us here. And first of all, your reaction to the latest inflation news. Of course, you were right on target with your book, which came out a couple of years ago on inflation. So we have the right guy on the line here. Give us your assessment of inflation and the economy overall.
Well, in terms of inflation, it's low enough where the Fed will make a cut in September next month because of their fears the economy is slowing down, some signs of strain. However, even though they are sort of now beginning to run a victory lap on inflation, I hope they pay attention to what's happening to the price of gold, which is hovering around a record high. That's an indication that the value of the dollar is coming down, which is the definition of inflation. So I just wish the Federal Reserve, Frank, would realize you don't fight inflation by hurting the economy. You fight it by stabilizing the value of the dollar. So we will get a formal cut, but I don't think it's going to do much for the economy. The markets, as you indicated, have already factored that in. And the number to look at is not what they call the federal funds rate, but what the Federal Reserve pays on bank reserves. Banks have tens of billions of dollars on deposit at the Federal Reserve, earning about 5.4%. That's the one that's got to be cut sharply so the banks have an incentive to lend again.
Speaking live to the one and only Steve Forbes here on 790 KBC. And want to get your view of what's happening on the political front as well. With, of course, we're watching what's happening with the presidential race unfolding, with the economy very much in focus here, with the Democratic candidate having that big conversation on CNN talking about the economy and, of course, talking about higher taxes, and President Trump, the Republican candidate, talking about lowering taxes. Why don't you size that up for us, please?
Well, the big issue next year is going to be what's happening to most of the Trump tax cuts, which were passed back in 2017. Under rules that for Congress, which they passed, peculiar rules, all of these expire next year, in the next year. So if they're not renewed, you're going to see a huge tax increase for everybody. So Trump wants those tax cuts renewed, and also add some more, like on tips and Social Security, and some more cuts in the corporate rate. Kamala Harris has made it clear she's against extension, except for the personal side for keeping the deductions high that Trump enacted 7 years ago. But the tax increases that Vice President Harris endorsed would devastate the economy, especially a 45% capital gains tax, which we haven't seen that level since the late 1970s. And that decade was a horror for the economy, for inflation, and for people's standard of living.
We're on the air live with Steve Forbes. What do you think this proposed tax on unrealized gains would do? It would obviously sap wealth right out of the country, right?
It would, and it would also destroy resources. You know, these people tend to think of wealth as cash. You may remember that old Disney character, Scrooge McDuck, who had that big money bin with piles of cash and jewelry and the like. And so these wealth taxers think you just go in and shovel the money out. They don't realize most wealth is not cash, but the value of assets, the value of property, the house, stocks, bonds, and land, farms, and the like. It's not cash. And so that kind of tax would be devastating and would lead to a lower standard of living. First, you're going to get less investment, and you're going to have an economy that creates fewer resources. And if you're not creating resources and savings, you move backwards. You have a stagnant economy. People's real standard of living is going to decline, just as it has for most people in the last 4 years.
So a pretty stark contrast between the Republican side and the Democratic side on on tax policy, which obviously is getting a lot of attention and should be getting a lot of attention as we head to the presidential election.
Absolutely. And what I'm afraid the other side seems to forget is that tax just isn't a means of raising revenue. Taxes are also a price. The tax you pay on income is the price you pay for working. Tax on profit, the price you pay for being successful. Capital gains tax, the same thing. And so when you raise the price on good things like productive work, risk taking, and success, you get less of them. And that's been true for thousands of years. So those tax increases, if any of them pass, would have a very, very disastrous impact on the economy.
What's your assessment of the dollar? One of our great contributors here on Mottek On Money, who's also one of the Forbes contributors, and that is Ken Winans, just posted an article on Forbes.com, The Giant Greenback, it's titled, and he's talking about how the U.S. dollar is defying economic gravity. What's your assessment of the dollar here?
Well, that's why the Federal Reserve should abandon its model of trying to depress the economy to fight inflation, precisely because the dollar is losing value. You see it not only against gold, which is a good barometer, but also amazingly against other currencies, which in and of themselves are not in great shape. But the dollar is right now worse than those currencies. You see it against the yen. Japan's debt is far worse than our own. You see it against the British pound, which has never been in recent years considered a strong currency. So it's not a good picture. And so once again, I think the Fed is going to be behind the curve. And the weakening dollar is that's a definition of inflation. Inflation is when the currency loses value, usually because you're creating too much of it, which is what you get when you spend a lot and then have to finance it with inflation.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, and turning to geopolitical matters, tensions remain very high in the Middle East, given the latest military action there. Israel still under threat by Iran for an attack, and of course the Israel-Hamas war continues following the Hamas attack on Israel back on October 7th. Give us your assessment of how this is playing out at the moment.
Well, there's a good lesson to be learned, and I hope I wish the Biden-Harris administration would learn it, and that is when you take a firm, positive reaction against the adversaries, against the bad guys, it works. One reason why Iran has been hesitant about retaliating, they will at some point, is that the Israelis have been knocking off their major leaders, including they had one in Iran, a big muck terrorist, who was in a supposedly super secure compound, and the Israelis set off a device in his room. And so much for Iranian security. And that's given them pause. And then in the northern Israel, southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah is very active, Israel didn't wait for Hezbollah to strike. They took some preemptive moves. So I think things are on tenterhooks there, and I'm afraid at some point you are going to get a war in northern Israel, southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has already forced the evacuation of 80,000 residents for several months now. So unless somehow miraculously Iran changes its attitude, I think you're going to see a wider conflict, unfortunately.
Now to pile on, we're, of course, also watching what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. Pretty disturbing report this week. Russia saying the West was playing with fire by considering allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory with Western missiles, cautioned the U.S. that World War III would not be confined to Europe. Give us your reaction to these belligerent reports and comments out of Russia.
This is part of Putin's strategy. He knows with this administration that if he makes noises like that, we put restraints on Ukraine. We don't give them the weaponry they need. We're still not providing enough air defense systems and the like. And also keeping on restrictions. Ukraine can hit a few areas in Russia, but we still have severe restraints on hitting most of their major military facilities and dumps, ammunition dumps in Russia. And so Russia has a sanctuary, and here they invade another country, but the country that's been assaulted is not allowed to fight back against the assaulter. And it's perverse. And so while Ukraine has boldly taken a chunk of Russian territory, their eastern front is under very severe pressure. They have more weapons than the Ukrainians do, and the Russians have made it clear they don't mind expending in human wave attacks tens and tens of thousands of their own soldiers, and gradually they're gaining some ground. So again, the administration's doing a half-baked approach. Instead of giving Ukraine what it needs to do the job to get the invaders out, or at least recover most of their territory. So it's not a good situation. So the next president's going to have his or her hands full. And I'm afraid so far, Vice President Harris has not given any indication she'll make a positive change in the policy, our foreign policy.
We're still guessing what those policies are, right? Even after that interview last night, haven't seen anything quite like this, right? You're a former presidential candidate yourself on the Republican side. Who's going to win?
I still think Trump will win. I don't think it for months, weeks on end, Vice President Harris can pretend she can not hide in a basement, but not answer real questions, and questions where you get real follow-through, which did not happen last night. There was no real follow-through on most of the subjects brought up. Half of it was an infomercial for the Harris-Walz team, and she probably, I think the Harris people believe that they don't have to do another presser, another press conference, or even a press interview, a real one, for several more weeks. And one of the things that has to be changed in the future is this early voting. Next week, early voting starts with North Carolina and then other states. Election should be on Election Day, because people get more information in September and October. Some people make changes in their decisions on how to vote, but once you cast that early ballot, that's it.
A lot of scrutiny now on those voter rolls. I think Texas would expunge about 1 million people off their rolls, and a lot of concern now about people who just arrived illegally getting set to vote or actually signing up for voting. What is your assessment of these huge concerns here about the integrity of the upcoming presidential election?
Well, it's very serious. And when people have questions about the legitimacy of election, that's a poison for a democracy. And several states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia have taken some real steps to make sure we don't get that kind of situation. But the fact that a lot of illegal immigrants are registering, hoping they don't get caught, is not a good thing at all. And again, let's have elections on Election Day. And what you have in some states now, they have to have a voter ID. Take a right up here.
On a lighter note, the Dow is at a record high. Certainly looks like that wall of worry has been successfully climbed here today anyway. What do you see ahead for this market and for this economy? Obviously, the AI craze continues. That was in the spotlight this week with NVIDIA, and I'm sure you've been discussing that pretty heavily this week too. But what's your view of things as we head into the Labor Day holiday weekend?
Well, it's nice to have something going in the right direction.
Yep.
But in terms of predicting the market, if I could do that, I would be on the Forbes 400 rich list. And, it's a fool's game to try to predict it, but I think the market's going to be very volatile in no small part as people start to focus on the election and realizing there are very stark differences between the two candidates on their tax policies, regulatory policies. So I think expect a lot of volatility. And then we're going to have next year a big cloud over the markets is going to be what's going to happen on taxes. Are we going to stumble our way into a big tax increase, or are we going to get a good tax bill that gets the economy firmly growing in the next few years?
You have the real-time billionaires list there at Forbes, and I'm looking at it right now. Elon Musk, way ahead of everybody, $243.7 billion, wealthiest guy in the world. Did you ever think you'd see a number like that?
The answer is no. And it's like some of in a very different way, some of the salaries you see now in the sports world, where now we're going into football season and these quarterbacks getting $40, $50, $60 million a year. As somebody said on more than one person has said, they'll work for $30 million as a quarterback. So it's a sign that there's a lot of opportunity for creating things. We were discussing earlier, the fact that Elon Musk is now going to have to rescue Boeing, from those individuals sent into space. That is a shocker, and we just have to hope that Boeing gets its act together, because and we should be grateful, whatever your politics, for Elon Musk. His rocketry is ahead of every other country in the world. He's ahead of ours. He's ahead of the Russians, the Chinese, Indians, everybody. And I'm glad he's on our side, because we'd be in really bad shape if we didn't have his rocket technology. Amazing what that individual's done there.
Certainly, and on the top of your list as we speak, up $4.4 billion just today. Quite remarkable, and something to celebrate, certainly. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for coming to the line. We wish you a great holiday weekend and look forward to speaking with you again very, very soon.
Look forward to it, too. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. Steve Forbes, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media, including Forbes Magazine, co-author of his book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Now available also on paperback, too, so be sure to check it out. An excellent read. And let's get right out to the freeways now here on 790 KABC. 790 KABC welcomes. Want to take a guess on this one? 98 Degrees coming to the Oxnard Performing Arts Center October 25th. Tickets are on sale now at AXS.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-790-5222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Tickets furnished by The Canyon, where music meets the soul. Record-shattering day for the stock market to wrap up the week and the month of August. The Dow 228 to a record-high close, 41,563. The S&P 500 of 56 at 5,648. And the NASDAQ up nearly 200 at 17,714. The yield in the 10-year note at 3.91%. Bitcoin up about 500 at 59,200. Looks like Ethereum's up 8 at 2,526. And Doge at the moment at 10 cents. Gold pulling back from its record high this week, down 24 and change at $2,536 an ounce. Silver down 74 cents at $29.25 an ounce. Now the latest news here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Crime and homelessness threatening another iconic Los Angeles restaurant. The iconic Langer's Deli in the MacArthur Park area, considering closing its doors after 76 years of that iconic location. Rising crime and homelessness in the area continues to impact that area in a big way. MacArthur Park is just outside the restaurant, riddled with trash, drug use, and homelessness. Joining us live now is the owner, Norm Langer. Mr. Langer, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
You're more than welcome. I'll be able to share time with you.
Wonderful to have you with us, and I know you're made big news this week, given what's going on there. Let's hear it straight from you. What is the situation there at the moment?
Well, as far as I am concerned, 7th Street from Alvarado to Westlake, where my parking lot is, the south side of 7th is fairly clean and fairly okay, but the north side is a disaster with drugs going on and vendors and all the various things that you could possibly think about. And I want it cleaned up. I want my customers who park in my lot on the corner of 7th and Westlake to have free reign to walk 1 block to the restaurant, regardless whether they're on the north side of the street or south. The north side, it's not safe. And that's what the discussion has been about. That's my ask from the mayor and from the council district.
And you're Your ask is getting attention, right? The mayor was there, and so was the DA candidate Nathan Hochman recently, right?
Yes, he was. He was here yesterday as well. So they've all listened to what I have to say. The councilwoman from CD1, Eunice Hernandez, who was very nice, they all listened to what I had to say. And the word that I got from the mayor and council member after the meet, at the end of the meeting, was they will look into it and see what they can do about it and get back to me. But the way it was expressed by them, they appear to be willing to get something done within a couple of weeks.
Have you seen any immediate action?
No, I didn't expect it because this meeting was yesterday. So I don't expect anything with the holiday weekend. Whatever I'm going to see, I don't expect to see it until next week.
Has George Gascon been there?
I knew George Gascon was involved in LAPD. Since he's been involved in this place in his life, no, I have not seen him.
What are your plans at this point, given these assurances?
I'll see what the next 2 weeks has to bring. That's basically what I'm looking at. I bent over backwards to give the city what they need, and now I need them to give me what I need. And what I need is not being unreasonable. So
and
that's
you're the
my
latest
ask.
Restaurant owner who's made these appeals. We talked to many others who are getting very frustrated. Businesses wrestling with the homeless and crime and so forth. What are some of the examples of what you've had to face recently there?
It's, you know what, it's the same as it's been over all the years. The biggest disservice that we had is when Ronald Reagan was governor and he closed up the mental institutions and put all those people out on the street. So now you're dealing with legitimately homeless people who've lost their apartments or their residence because they couldn't pay. You're dealing with drug dealers and drug addicts, and you're dealing with legitimately mentally ill people. That is the problem. And it all emanated from Ronald Reagan. Now, unless you do something with the mentally ill, you're not going to solve the problem. They're your biggest issue. It is not the homeless. I'd venture to say, in my opinion, of all the people on the street, only 20% are legitimately homeless that don't have a place to live. They're not on drugs. They're legitimately homeless. Now, we do have another situation where if you're legitimately homeless or on the street long enough, they may turn to drugs. And that's the issue.
We're on the air live with Norm Langer, the owner of Langer's Deli in the MacArthur Park area. I just drove by that area today, by the way. It's unbelievable when you stop there at Wilshire and Alvarado, right, to see what the scene is there. It's been going on for quite some time, but it does seem to be getting worse, right?
Yes, it's worse day by day because there's no enforcement, number one. And since George Gascon is going into office, not only is there no enforcement, but there's no penalty to be paid. So the LAPD is lax in some of their arrests because all it is turnkey. And why bother with it? You pick up one, you got two more to replace it. So unless the city council and all of the law enforcement agencies are willing to get involved, you'll never clean it up.
Tell us about the history of Langer's Deli. God bless you for hanging in there in the face of all of this, but you have an iconic restaurant there. Tell us about Langer's Deli.
Well, my parents opened it up June of 1947. I've been here since 1963, and we've gone from an original 12 seats to 135 that we seat today. And I've won the James Beard Award. I've won the Michelin Gourmand Award. I've done things properly. I've done it right. I have 40 employees that are all union. We're a union house. And we're the only freestanding restaurant in the city of Los Angeles that's not connected to a hotel. That is union. So, I'm doing my part for my employees. I'm trying to do the right thing. As far as my items on the menu, I try to feature a little bit of everything to make everybody happy. Jewish deli food. And that's what you're going to get when you come here. If you're fortunate enough I'm here, you might get some conversation. but you never know.
What is the security situation there?
Security situation here is good. There is no problem. My customers, for all the years, we've never had one customer bothered. They've walked free from my parking lot to here. It's visual blight. That happens to be a fact. Now, as far as the customers being accosted or whatnot, we did have a situation yesterday for the first time, but it had nothing to do with me. There was a woman down at 722 South Alvarado. We are at 704. And it was a street person came up to her and stole 2 gold chains off her neck, according to what I understand. And supposedly, this individual had some type of a weapon under his garment. That's what the story is. The woman ran down the street, and she ran in my front door. And Rosie, one of my supervisors, befriended her. Rosie gave her her phone so she could call the police. And that was it. It had nothing to do with me or Langer's Deli. It had to do with a street person that was attacked. So, and it was put out on some of the media this morning that it was one of the people standing in line to come in my restaurant, which is not true. So it is safe from my parking lot to here. That I will attest to. Never been a case by anybody of any type of assault or anything as such.
Norm Langer, thank you very much for sharing your story with us here today. The whole community is with you, and we wish you all the best. We'll keep an open line to you as things play out over the next couple of weeks, and certainly we hope you stay in business after this glorious history there, the iconic Langer's Deli right there in the MacArthur Park area. Norm Langer, we wish you a great Labor Day holiday weekend, and thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
And thank you so much for allowing me to share. Take care, and I wish everybody a safe holiday. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Likewise. Thank you very, very much. And right after the freeways now on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Inflation back in the spotlight today with the latest reading out first thing this morning. Insurance costs, in case you haven't noticed, skyrocketing, especially car insurance premiums. It turns out we've seen about a 15% increase from 2023 and a stunning 48% spike when compared with 2021, according to a new report published by Insurify, an insurance comparison shopping site showing the average rate for full auto insurance surged to $2,329 in the first half of this year. Let's bring in our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. Lauren, thanks very much for taking the call. And what are you hearing about auto insurance rates and your reaction to this report here?
Well, that actually doesn't surprise me, but California, of all states, has the highest increase in insurance rates of 54% this year. So that's an average of $2,681. And the reason that California is higher than any other state, because Missouri is up and Minnesota and, of course, New York is up, is because California froze their insurance rates during the COVID pandemic. And as a result, some insurers held back. And now as soon as they lifted the freezing of increased insurance rates, well, you know what they did? They had double-digit hikes. And this is to try and make up for their losses, because cars cost more to repair, they cost more to purchase, there's a shortage of mechanics, and all these start to make the perfect storm. And so unfortunately for us as the consumers, especially in California, they took the biggest hit. And it's just the overall, supply demand for parts. There's a shortage of chips. We all knew about that. There's a shortage of components, whether it be electronic or metal parts. So if you had a fender bender during COVID, maybe you were still at the lower rate, but now you're at a much higher rate, and more people are also in the risk pool. And that's tough because it means the rates are very, very high.
And let's not forget about crime. People having their catalytic converters stolen and even getting killed over it. In one horrific example that we saw this year, and windows being shattered and so forth, and police hardly respond to these calls anymore and just say, "Oh yeah, just fill out online and make a claim with your insurance company," and ultimately that's got to impact the rates, right?
Absolutely, and there's also carjacking still going on, and that's across the country, mostly in bigger cities. But you have to keep that in mind. You don't expect to be sitting at a traffic light and having someone smash your window and take something from your back seat, which we've seen in San Francisco, and also any of the other big cities. The carjackings are still out of control. People go to pump gas. You're not paying attention. You're filling your vehicle up with fuel. Someone jumps in the car and takes off because you left the key in there. So now what I do is when I get out of the car, I close the door, I lock it, I take the key with me. If someone wants to steal a car, let them steal the car. You can always get another one. That's why we have insurance. But sometimes people feel that they have to fight to protect their property, and I understand that because I would probably end up doing that naturally myself. But let them take the catalytic converter. You can always get one out of a salvage yard. The insurance companies will pay for them, but the problem is getting the parts. And then once they get the parts, they have to find a mechanic to do it. So you have weeks and weeks and weeks without a vehicle. And getting a loaner car is very difficult these days because many of the companies that offer them have cut their fleets down dramatically. As well, everything costs more. And with that thought in mind, that means insurance is going to get higher as well as homeowners insurance. And of course, you have natural disasters that happen in California that aren't in every single state. But overall, I guess the question is who's to blame? I think freezing the insurance rates for such a long period of time in California, which was more so than they did in any other state, was a huge factor in the gigantic jump in insurance rates that are in California.
Right, and another example of the impact of government intervention in the free market. So let me ask you this, just as we see, it seems like auto prices have eased, right? Remember, that was a big story, speaking of inflation, when we saw that huge spike in used car prices, and people were clamoring even for cars at 100,000, 200,000 miles on them, not too long ago. What about new and used car prices nowadays?
Well, I think the problem is used car prices are slightly softer, but what's available? The inventory has shrunk and the demand has dropped off a little bit. And so when you're looking at new cars, you drive by a dealer lot, they have inventory now, which is great. So you can buy what you want, but also keep in mind, electric vehicles aren't selling at the rate that they were hoping for. Every single brand, now it's every brand. When I spoke with you last, Volvo and Jaguar hadn't jumped on board, but in the last week, they're going to start offering hybrids. I'm actually reviewing one right now. And the hybrids are starting to become very popular options. The problem is there's not enough inventory for those either. So during the pandemic, we had a shortage of cars. People purchased cars off the lease. They kept those vehicles. Now the average car on the road is 15 years old. But what people are doing is they're going to look at used cars, and there's not much inventory because what was 3 years ago, right in the middle of the pandemic. And I did call it out. I think I actually did a story with you on this, that there's going to be less vehicles available in late 2024 and into 25. And here we are with less vehicles because less vehicles were leased. And so as people roll off their lease, that means there's less inventory for you to choose from. The only thing that's on sale this weekend, because Labor Day always has sales at the dealers, is mostly electric vehicles at 0% financing. And they're for very long term. So please read the details before you make a decision on this is a great time to buy if you want an electric vehicle. But be careful, some of them are 72 months. You don't want to own the vehicle that long. Try to get rid of them within 5 years because that's when you're going to end up having to replace the battery, and you won't want the bill for that.
Lauren, thank you very much for that excellent advice as always. It could be a big weekend for the car dealers this Labor Day weekend. Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast, live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KABC.
Are you tired of losing your fantasy football league year after year? Lindsey Rhodes, Emmy-winning sportscaster and football analyst, is your new secret weapon on the Believe Fantasy Football Show.
Watch the quarterbacks and his ADP. I think he has massive high-end upside.
Get expert analysis on player rankings.
Wide receiver 22 in fantasy, Cecil Shorts.
That kid can run, so I'm thinking he can have a breakout season this year.
And you can too by searching the Believe Fantasy Football Show. That's BLEAV wherever you listen.